Now, plenty is still unfolding in the US, with a relentless media focus on President Trump, of course. Much is being made of these comments by Donald Trump's Defence Secretary.
I've always believed and continue to believe that the National Guard is best suited for performing domestic support to civil authorities in these situations in support of local law enforcement. I say this not only as Secretary of Defense, but also as a former soldier and a former member of the National Guard. The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
A last resort, fair enough. Here's what the President said on Monday.
First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
Not much difference there, is there? It's all about last resort. It's all about emphasis. But it seems there is some tension between the two men. Trump used the threat of military intervention to try to force city mayors and state governors to do more with their police and their National Guards. Signs are it might have worked, at least to some degree. But you won't hear journalists even countenance such possibilities. They're obsessed with slamming Trump. But the real issue here is the long-standing schism, the grassroots divide of racial discrimination and the policing of African-American communities. Now, all 4 police officers have now been charged over the death, that vicious death, of George Floyd. It's been revealed he tested positive for coronavirus in the days before his death, and his criminal past has been publicised of late as well. He served a number of jail terms for armed robbery and drug offences. Now, neither of these factors ought to diminish public anger or justify or downplay his appallingly callous and deadly treatment at the hands of police. But Conservative commentator CANDACE Owens argues the cycle of crime in some communities has to be part of the broader debate.
George Floyd was a criminal. He was a criminal. And just because he was a criminal doesn't mean he deserved to die at the knee of a police officer. But it does mean that I am not going to play a part of the broken black culture that always wants to martyr criminals, who wants to pretend they were these upstanding human beings that just wanted to help society, that just wanted to reach out and uplift society. And he has a rap sheet that is long, that is dangerous. He was an example of a violent criminal his entire life. Okay, up until the very last moment. Now, again, I want to be clear. This is not a defense for Derek Chauvin. No one that I have spoken to, no one in the news is defending Derek Chauvin. He is getting what he has coming to him. Okay, great. This is why we have a cycle and a toxic culture, because nobody wants to tell the truth in Black America. It's so easy to be a victim. It's so easy to ask white people to bow down and apologize and do all these things for us. It's crap. We're going to get ahead. Black conservatives get ahead because we don't subscribe to this narrative. Because you're not going to catch me outside trying to grab a TV pretending that it's because a martyr named George Floyd got killed. Okay? I'm a big believer that no matter what color you are, you do stupid things, you win stupid prizes. Okay? We have to do better. We have to teach our kids better, or we're not going to get ahead, right?
Yeah, Candace Owens is a straight talker. We hear a lot about victimhood, a lot about white privilege and the racial divide, and we know there's a deep-seated discrimination problem to be overcome in the US. But Owens' focus on personal responsibility is crucial in the aftermath of this trauma, because it's the approach most likely to deliver tangible results for individuals in the here and now. Let's catch up with US correspondent for the Australian and for Sky News, Cameron Stewart, in Washington. I asked him earlier whether the whole country had been waiting for those additional charges to be laid against the Minneapolis police officers.
Yeah, it certainly is, Chris. Look, it's a big moment, I think. I mean, upgrading the charge against Derek Chauvin from third to second degree murder is a big deal. You know, I mean, second degree murder is, they've got to actually prove that it was intentional. So it's going to be a challenge for the prosecutor to that degree, but it's a much more serious charge. And of course, the three officers who we saw, you know, standing around and leaning on George Floyd as well. I mean, they've been charged with aiding and abetting second degree murder. Again, a very serious charge. I'm sure the prosecutors were also hoping that this will have some sort of play across America, and that with these protests, it may help to calm down some of the tensions that we've seen over the past week.
Yeah, I think they were slow to lay charges in the first place. Is there any sense yet that the sting might be taken out of some of the protests, or at least out of some of the lawlessness?
Look, there certainly is. I mean, last night, in fact, before they laid these charges, what we saw was very large protests across the country yet again, but with a remarkable absence of violence compared to the previous days. And that includes in New York City, where there was terrible looting 48 hours ago. Tonight, so far, we have seen, again, a couple of clashes here and there in Orlando, Florida, a couple in Brooklyn, New York, but really fairly minor, very minor in the big scheme of things, especially considering how many protesters are still out there, Chris, and how many police are out there, and National Guard as well. What we've seen in Washington also, I've been down to the White House each day having a look and seeing the progress of the protests there. And what you're seeing is the officials are progressively moving the crowd back after that big violent day when we saw, of course, the police push those protesters out so the president could visit the church opposite the White House. We've now seen a fence erected the next day between the White House and the streets. And now what we're seeing each day is the protests are getting pushed back by 1 block and 2 block, and there's armoured vehicles in between. So it's progressively moving the protesters back. And accompanying this is the fact that the protesters are there's a lot more mums and dads now, families. You seem to get a lot fewer at this minute of those professional protesters that we saw early on who are causing a lot of the trouble.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I mean, the protests here, peaceful protests here, everybody would support it. The cause here is obvious, the anger understandable, but it's that opportunistic lawlessness that has been frightening to see right around the country. Any evidence that that is abating in places as far away as Los Angeles and New York?
You know, so it's interesting. A lot of the protesters, the vast majority, I think, are interested in a peaceful protest, and I think they're getting a bit jack of this rat bag element, if you like, that has caused trouble towards the end of protests, usually after the curfews, about 11 p.m. at night here in America. And they're the ones who go looting, and they're the ones who are obviously causing a lot of grief for the police, are causing people's safety to be in harm, and frankly, I think just undermining the whole concept of the protests, protesting about the terrible death of George Floyd and the issue of police and race.
Now, let's get into the politics here. And the Defence Secretary, Mark Esper, much is being made of his comments. He's saying that it would be a move of the last resort to put the military onto the streets to restore law and order. The use of the Insurrection Act would be the last resort, and he wouldn't want to do it. That's pretty much what the president said. It was a different emphasis, but Donald Trump said the same thing, didn't he? He used this as a threat. He wanted the states and the cities to use their police forces and the National Guard. He said he would use the military if it was required.
That's right. I mean, it's a fine distinction, but it was interesting that Mark Esper, the Defence Secretary, did come out and say this, because it was certainly something that would jar inside the Oval Office. You know, I mean, what Mark Esper was saying, I mean, you are correct. What he's saying is that basically he doesn't see at this point in time that the Insurrection Act of 1807 or something, it's a long time ago, is necessary. Donald Trump threatened, of course, to use the act if governors and mayors in the cities didn't do enough. But Esper's come out and said, I don't believe this should be employed at this point in time. So, you know, it's a bit of a semantic difference to a degree, but even the fact, I mean, Donald Trump is fairly volatile when he gets his cabinet openly disagreeing with him, and so he probably won't be very happy. There's been a lot of speculation here in Washington that Mark Esper may be about to go out, but he may not be. I mean, Trump's been fairly quiet.
It is fascinating, and I don't think too many people would disagree with the Defence Secretary, but I suppose the open question is whether Trump's threat actually did push some of the state governors and city mayors to get a bit more proactive in their policing. Perhaps even more controversial are the remarks of the former Defence Secretary, Jim Mattis, and he's reported as saying that he sees Donald Trump as being too divisive and that he's appalled at the idea of the military being involved.
He's pulled his punches towards Trump when you know that he doesn't like Trump. But today he really came out firing, and he just said, look, he's never known a president to seek to divide the American people so much and not even try to unite them. And he's very upset about what he saw as Mark Esper and the Joint Chief of Staff coming over and being in a photo opportunity with the president. So Mattis is very upset about that, and he's really let loose today.
Trump, of course, is a polarising figure, and he's a massive target, and also he's a massive troller, and he's always aggressive towards his opponents. But why are we hearing so much about Trump throughout this affair, and much less about the state governors and city mayors, often Democrat leaders, who actually have the responsibility for law and order on their streets?
Yeah, that's right. Look, we have had some things coming through. I mean, certainly Bill de Blasio in New York was, I think, very heavily criticised when there was, 48 hours ago, there was a terrible night of looting in New York. It was extraordinary. I mean, literally just gangs going down Fifth Avenue, breaking into these high-level retailers and just stealing what they wanted to do. And even Andrew Cuomo, who Trump was criticising Cuomo for not keeping control of New York, and Cuomo was criticising de Blasio.
Of course, all the while, in the background, the nation is still battling with the coronavirus pandemic, and that's had a big impact on day-to-day life, just the way that Americans are going about their day-to-day lives. You wrote a great piece a few days ago from your own son's graduation, a graduation pandemic style. Tell us about Tobias and how that all transpired.
My son is 11 years old. He was graduating from elementary school. It's an American thing. You graduate from 3 schools in America. But it's a big moment in America. The Americans love to have the big graduation. They clap the kids as they walk off the school. And it's a moment. Of course, it's all online now because of the pandemic. So we were watching the online graduation, which was kind of, nice, but kind of tragic really at the same time. And then the parents just said, look, let's do something fun. And so they said, put your kids in the car and we'll drive around the school. We'll keep driving around the school, and all the parents and friends can stand on the sidewalk and clap from socially acceptable distances. So I stuck my kid in my boy Tobias in the front seat. He had his top half of his body outside the sunroof. He loved it. It was the best car ride he'd ever had. Drove around 3 times. He laughed. Everyone was laughing everywhere. It was the first time, Chris, in months I heard laughter fill the streets of Washington. It was incredible. It was such a nice moment because it's been pretty tough over here.
Great stuff, Cameron. Thanks for joining us, and congratulations to Tobias.
Thanks, mate.